In one of the most impactful legal moments in the history of mixed martial arts, the UFC, the sport's dominant organization, has agreed to pay a staggering $375 million to settle an antitrust lawsuit that's been brewing for more than a decade. The lawsuit, Le versus Zuffa, was filed back in 2014 by a group of former UFC fighters, including Kung Lei, John Fitch, and Nate Quarry. He had used its power and influence to act as a monopoly, controlling not only the market, but also the careers, earnings, and futures of its fighters. According to court documents, the fighters accused the UFC of engaging in anti-competitive practices. That means doing things like forcing fighters to sign exclusive, long-term contracts, buying out rival promotions like Strikeforce and Pride, and shutting down opportunities for athletes to earn more money elsewhere. The goal, they claimed, was simple: consolidate power, reduce competition, and keep fighter pay low. For years, the UFC denied all wrongdoing, and it still does. But in October 2024, after more than 10 years of legal back and forth, a federal judge preliminarily approved a $375 million settlement. In February 2025, it became official. Now, let's break down what that actually means. The settlement covers fighters who competed in the UFC between December 2010 and June 2017. That's a huge chunk of the roster from a key era in the sport, when fighters like Georges St-Pierre, Anderson Silva, and John Jones were in their primes. Of the $375 million, an estimated $240 to $260 million will go directly to the fighters, based on how many bouts they had, their earnings, and other metrics. Some fighters could receive as much as $1 million or more, while others may receive much less. Roughly $115 million of the settlement will be used to cover legal fees and administrative costs, a standard part of class action lawsuits. And here's the part that's raising eyebrows. Despite agreeing to pay out this massive sum, the UFC did not admit to any wrongdoing. In legal terms, this is what's called a no-fault settlement. Essentially, the UFC is writing a massive check, but officially taking no blame. From their perspective, it's about avoiding further litigation costs and moving on. So, did justice get served? Or was this just a financial escape hatch? For many fighters, this payout represents a long overdue acknowledgement of unfair treatment. The class action plaintiffs argued that the UFC controlled around 90% of the elite MMA market during the years in question. Unlike other sports, like the NFL, NBA, or MLB, UFC fighters don't have a union. They don't get a cut of broadcasting deals, and they often make a fraction of the revenue they help generate. To put it in perspective, the UFC reportedly shares less than 20% of its revenue with fighters, a stark contrast to traditional leagues where revenue sharing often reaches 48 to 50%. But here's the kicker. While the lawsuit might be over, the larger battle is still underway. A second ongoing antitrust lawsuit, called Johnson versus Zuffa, was filed in 2021 and is still active in the courts. This case picks up where the last one left off, targeting the UFC's business practices from July 2017 to the present day. The allegations are very similar: monopolistic contracts, unfair market control, and the continued suppression of fighter pay. In early June 2025, two new plaintiffs joined the Johnson case, former UFC fighters Phil Davis and Misha Kirkunov, both arguing that the UFC's contract terms stifled their careers and earnings potential. They allege that the company continues to use the same coercive methods, restrictive contracts, automatic extensions, and control over sponsorship opportunities. What's particularly interesting is that US District Judge Richard Boulware, the same judge who oversaw the Lee vs. Zuffa case, will also be presiding over Johnson vs. Zuffa. And in a recent ruling, he stated that he, not a jury, will decide whether the UFC qualifies as a monopoly. That's a big deal because it could lead to structural changes, not just another cash settlement. So, what does all of this mean for the sport of MMA? On one hand, This is a milestone. It proves that fighters, even without a union, can stand up against one of the most powerful entities in sports and walk away with hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation. It's a warning shot, and it opens the door for more transparency and, perhaps one day, real collective bargaining. On the other hand, the UFC walks away without having to admit any fault. It hasn't changed its contracts, it hasn't raised revenue sharing, and it remains firmly in control of the MMA world. For the fans, this moment may feel distant, but for the fighters, past, present, and future, this case could shape the economics of MMA for years to come. The Johnson lawsuit could be the next major turning point. And if the courts ultimately find that the UFC operates as a monopoly, the ripple effects could be massive. Not just for the UFC, but for the entire global fight game. This fight isn't over. In fact, it might just be getting started.